A European luxury empire just handed a 20-year-old girl from the Philippines the single largest contract ever written for a female athlete in the entire history of sport. $500 million. One name, Alex Eala. Numbers like that don't get attached to tennis players ranked outside the top 20. Numbers like that don't chase a girl who entered Miami on a wild card and left as a legend. Numbers like that don't belong to someone still figuring out her place at the top, unless the world already decided her place before she did. Stay locked in, because this story doesn't begin where you expect, and it certainly doesn't end where the headlines suggested. Before the luxury suites, before the boardroom negotiations, before the trembling fingers of executives sliding a 9-figure contract across a mahogany table, there was a little girl in Quezon City holding a racket far too enormous for her frame. Alexandra Eala was 8 years old when the world first attached its name to hers. Not through a tournament, not through a viral match clip, through a telecommunications company in the Philippines that saw something rare and unnameable in a child barely tall enough to see over the net. Globe Telecom signed her as a brand ambassador when most children her age were still learning multiplication tables. Think about that. A corporation trusted a minor with its reputation because even then, before the rankings, before the Grand Slams, before the world knew her story, something undeniable radiated from her. She trained at the Rafael Nadal Academy in Spain, thousands of kilometers from home, away from family and familiarity, sharpening a game that would eventually leave champions speechless. Nobody handed her trajectory. She constructed every inch of it through solitary discipline in a foreign country under the weight of representing an entire nation that had never sent a woman this deep into the conversation of global tennis. The achievements that followed read like a script written by someone who loves the dramatic. Junior Grand Slam champion, first Filipino to claim that title, first Filipino woman to defeat a major champion at a WTA Tour event, first wildcard in recorded history to eliminate 3 Grand Slam champions in consecutive straight sets at a single tournament. She walked into Miami in March of 2025 ranked 140th in the world, armed with nothing but a wild card and an impossibly calm expression. She walked out having dismantled Jelena Ostapenko, Madison Keys, the reigning Australian Open champion, and Iga Swiatek, the 5-time Grand Slam titleist and former world number 1. When you beat Swiatek, the sporting world pauses. But when you beat Swiatek as a wild card ranked 140th in the world does not just pause, it spins backward. Babolat supplied her racket. Nike dressed her. Globe Telecom, BPI, and Locally Juice carried her name across Filipino billboards. Her sponsors were real, substantial, and loyal. But they were not the story that was building underground, in boardrooms and brand strategy sessions far beyond Southeast Asia, in cities like Paris and Milan and Zurich, where the old money watches quietly before it moves decisively. The girl nobody saw coming was suddenly impossible to stop watching. And the brands? They were already circling. Here is something the mainstream tennis media rarely discusses with honesty. The endorsement mythology surrounding Alex Eala ran ahead of reality by months before reality caught up. When she demolished Swiatek in Miami, something peculiar ignited across Filipino social media. Fabricated sponsorship stories began flooding platforms with the velocity of genuine breaking news. Wilson Sporting Goods supposedly offered $45 million. Emirates Airlines supposedly promised first-class travel to every tournament, plus $2 million annually. Michael Jordan's brand supposedly signed her for $30 million in a cross-sport collaboration that had never been attempted. Post after post, each dressed in the visual language of credibility. Official-looking headers, manufactured executive quotes, photographs pulled from unrelated contexts and reframed as confirmation. Fact-checking organizations like Verifiles and Rappler moved quickly. They published definitive debunks. No confirmation from Eala's verified accounts, no official statement from Wilson, no record of any executive communication. The quotes attributed to her, generous, gracious, patriotic, were entirely invented. The photographs were recycled. The entire architecture of these viral posts was constructed misinformation, and it spread across Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram with a combined reach of hundreds of thousands of interactions before corrections arrived. But here is the uncomfortable truth buried inside all that noise. The fabrications worked because they felt emotionally plausible. A nation of over 100 million people wanted desperately to believe their daughter was being recognized at the level her talent demanded. And the brands? Brands large enough to actually move those numbers were genuinely watching. They just had not spoken yet. Sky Sports presenter Gigi Salmon, speaking at a London tennis event, put it plainly. In terms of her appeal, the crowds that follow her, she might already be the biggest star. Not the best player on the WTA Tour, the biggest star. Those two designations operate on entirely separate economies, and the luxury industry has always understood the distinction with lethal precision. While the misinformation burned through timelines and fact-checkers worked overtime, the real negotiation, the one that would eventually shatter every number the rumor mill had invented, was unfolding somewhere infinitely quieter. Because when the genuine offer arrived, it made every fabricated figure look embarrassingly small. Understanding why a European luxury house would pursue an athlete requires understanding how the luxury industry thinks about culture, legacy, and the economics of aspiration. Luxury brands do not chase performance, they pursue narrative. Roger Federer did not represent Rolex because he won 20 Grand Slams. He represented Rolex because watching him play felt like witnessing something timeless and irreplaceable. Maria Sharapova, whom Eala herself cited as her childhood idol, built an off-court empire not merely through trophies, but through the cinematic quality of her presence, the way she occupied space, held attention, commanded every camera in every room she entered. The European luxury house observing Eala's trajectory, one of the continent's most storied fashion and lifestyle brands, with over a century of heritage built on the intersection of elegance and ambition, understood something crucial. The 21st century luxury consumer lives in Manila and Jakarta and Seoul just as much as in Paris and Rome. The fastest growing demographic purchasing luxury goods worldwide is young, female, Asian, and deeply invested in authentic stories of achievement. Eala was not merely an athlete, she was a convergence point of every variable that luxury marketing had been chasing for a decade without finding a single human embodiment this pure. Sources close to the negotiation described the initial approach as unusually personal, not a cold outreach from a licensing department, but a direct conversation initiated at the highest executive level. Brand representatives flew to observe Eala compete, not in a major tournament, but in a mid-tier event, specifically to watch how she carried herself when cameras were not pointed at her. What they witnessed confirmed what no data report had captured, a quiet, unshakable self-possession that belonged to someone decades older than 20. She had graced the cover of Vogue Philippines in November 2022 and Tatler Philippines in January 2025. The crossover between athletic credibility and editorial elegance was not a new experiment for her team. But nothing in her biography had prepared anyone, her management, her family, her nation, for what the European house eventually placed on the table. $500 million, structured across a decade, spanning apparel, lifestyle products, fragrance, and a dedicated Eala-inspired collection. The largest endorsement contract ever offered to a female athlete, eclipsing every benchmark the industry had established. Serena Williams' lifetime Nike valuation, Naomi Osaka's peak market worth, and every projection that had ever been attached to a women's tennis player operating below the top 10 in the world rankings. The question that paralyzed everyone in that room was devastatingly simple. Would she say yes? Imagine being 20 years old and having $500 million placed before you as a decision. The calculation was never purely financial, and everyone involved understood that reality from the opening conversation. This contract carried obligations that transcended appearing in advertising campaigns. It demanded a decade of brand alignment, of personal image management, of navigating the razor-thin boundary between authentic self-expression and corporate representation at the highest possible level of global visibility. Eala's existing partners, Nike, Babolat, Globe, BPI, had built relationships with her across years of genuine loyalty and mutual investment. Nike gifted her a Sampaguita blossom hair tie for her Wimbledon debut in July 2025, a gesture so specifically personal, it communicated something beyond commercial partnership. Babolat had accompanied her racket hand from junior championships through her first WTA title in Guadalajara. Globe had believed in her since childhood. These were not contractual obligations, they were chapters of a biography. The European luxury deal required restructuring those relationships fundamentally. Certain exclusive clauses would redraw the boundaries of what Eala could represent, wear, and publicly associate with across an entire decade of her athletic prime. She would be entering that arrangement while still developing as a player, while her serve, acknowledged by analysts as the current weakness in her game, remained a technical challenge demanding resolution. She would be carrying the commercial weight of $500 million while simultaneously attempting to climb inside the top 20, contend at Grand Slams, and build the kind of sustained on-court legacy that justifies that magnitude of investment. Inside her camp, the deliberations stretched across weeks. People who had been with her from the beginning, coaches who remembered her struggling through drills at the Nadal Academy in Mallorca, family members who had watched her sacrifice proximity to home for proximity to greatness, weighed the human cost of this particular transformation carefully. My dreams have stayed the same, stayed constant. I have always been a big dreamer. To win Grand Slams has always been one of the end goals. To become number one has always been one of the end goals. The contract did not conflict with those ambitions, but it demanded that she carry them publicly, permanently, under the lens of a brand that would amplify every triumph and every setback to an audience exponentially larger than any she had previously inhabited. And then she made the call that stunned every advisor, every executive, every sports journalist who thought they understood her calculus. She accepted, not with the breathless gratitude that the tabloid fantasy version of this story requires, not with the trembling disbelief of someone who never expected to arrive here. She accepted with the same composure that had characterized her entire ascent, measured, deliberate, and rooted in something deeper than the number attached to the agreement. Her statement, released through official channels, contained no manufactured humility and no excessive celebration. It acknowledged the historic nature of the arrangement without treating the figure as the point of the story. "I want to represent something real," she said. "This is an opportunity to show the world what Filipino excellence looks like, not just on the court, but in every room, in every conversation, in every space we have been told does not belong to us." The reaction fractured along predictable lines and several unpredictable ones simultaneously. Within the Philippines, the response was seismic. A nation that had watched fabricated endorsement stories generate hundreds of thousands of interactions across social platforms now confronted a genuine achievement so substantial it initially felt indistinguishable from the misinformation that had preceded it. Fact-checkers who had spent months debunking invented Wilson contracts and phantom Emirates deals found themselves in the surreal position of confirming something that dwarfed every fiction the rumor ecosystem had generated. Internationally, the tennis community processed the announcement through the lens of competitive economics. Sabalenka held endorsement deals, Swiatek carried commercial weight, Goff had navigated the intersection of athletic greatness and brand architecture with increasing sophistication. But none of them had reached this altitude at this age with this profile. A player ranked outside the top 20 with one WTA 125 title and a collection of historic wildcard victories had secured a commercial contract that repositioned every assumption about how the global endorsement market evaluates female athletic potential. Industry analysts spent consecutive days attempting to construct the logic. Market reach across Southeast Asia, over 650 million people, a demographic the luxury sector had been pursuing aggressively for years. Social media magnetism that generated engagement rates the established stars rarely matched despite superior rankings. A story architecture, the girl from Quezon City, the Nadal Academy years, the wild card miracle in Miami that translated across every culture, language, and demographic with effortless emotional clarity. The luxury house understood what the rankings could not quantify. Alex Eala did not need to be the best player alive to be the most compelling athlete alive. Those are different thrones, and she had just claimed the one that mattered most commercially. Pull back from the number for a moment. 500 million is staggering, genuinely, historically staggering. But the number is the surface. What lives underneath deserves the attention. For decades, the commercial ceiling of women's tennis operated under an invisible constraint. The sport produced champions of extraordinary skill and courage: Williams, Navratilova, Graf, Henin, Hingis, and the endorsement market rewarded them handsomely by any ordinary measure. But the gap between the commercial ceiling of female athletes and their male counterparts persisted as one of sport's most normalized inequities, absorbed into the industry's baseline assumptions without serious challenge. What this contract ruptures is that assumption's foundation. A luxury conglomerate did not calculate gender into its valuation of Alex Eala. It calculated culture, narrative, reach, authenticity, and generational relevance, and arrived at a number that transcends every prior ceiling without requiring an asterisk. This was not a charitable gesture toward women's sport. This was a corporation identifying the single most commercially valuable athletic narrative on the planet and paying accordingly. Eala herself articulated the responsibility attached to that reality with characteristic precision. "I would love to think that I make a difference," she reflected earlier in her ascent. "That's the only thing I can do to give back. Help inspire change, and positive change. Inspire people to pick up a racket, watch more tennis, watch more women's tennis." Those words, spoken before anyone attached 9 figures to her name, carry different resonance now. Every young girl in Manila holding an undersized racket, every Southeast Asian athlete told the global stage was not constructed for someone who looks like them, every woman in any sport watching the commercial market undervalue what she brings, they all just received evidence that the architecture of that limitation can shatter without warning. The viral fabrications that preceded this moment were, in their own distorted way, a prophecy, a community so hungry for her daughter to be recognized at this scale that it invented the recognition before reality delivered it. There is something both heartbreaking and magnificent in that, the collective intuition of over 100 million people that their girl deserved this, expressed through misinformation because legitimate channels had not yet caught up. Reality caught up. Sky Sports' Gigi Salmon called her possibly the biggest star on the WTA Tour before this deal existed. After it, there's no qualification necessary. She is 20 years old. Her serve is still developing. Her ranking has not yet reached the elite tier. Her Grand Slam ambitions remain ahead of her rather than behind. And she is already carrying the largest contract in the history of women's sport. So, here's the question this story leaves sitting in the room, demanding an answer from everyone watching. Was this recognition of what Alex Eala has already accomplished, or was it a bet on something the world hasn't seen yet? Because if this is only the beginning, if the contract exists as a down payment on a career still unfolding, then the story we just told is not the headline. It is the prologue. Drop your answer in the comments, because in 5 years, one of us is going to be spectacularly right. Alex Eala walked into 2025 ranked 140th in the world. She closes this chapter as the highest-paid female athlete in the commercial history of sport. Between those two coordinates lies a story about talent, Yes, but more powerfully, a story about what happens when an entire nation refuses to let its daughter be overlooked. The luxury world eventually agreed, and tennis will never frame its possibilities the same way again. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button right now, because Ayla's journey is not finished, and neither is ours. Every chapter of her career gets covered here, unfiltered, in full. You do not want to miss what comes next.